December 25th, 336 AD, Rome. The Great Basilica is packed with thousands of worshippers celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ for the first time on this date in recorded Christian history. But here's something extraordinary. Just hours earlier, many of these same people were pouring wine on altars, burning candles in windows, and honoring the unconquered sun god, Sol Invictus, whose sacred day also fell on December 25th. Coincidence? Not quite. What if I told you that the calendar you use to celebrate Easter, Christmas, and virtually every major Christian holiday was deliberately engineered by absorbing the very pagan festivals it was supposed to replace? The year is 312 AD, and Emperor Constantine has just won the Battle of Milvian Bridge. Legend says he saw a vision of the cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign, conquer." But Constantine had a problem. Christianity was still a minority religion in an empire saturated with hundreds of pagan cults, mystery religions, and ancient traditions that had existed for millennia. The Romans worshipped Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and Venus. The Germanic tribes venerated Odin and Thor. The Celts celebrated their own pantheon with elaborate seasonal festivals. How do you convert an entire empire without starting a civil war? The answer was brilliant, pragmatic, and utterly transformative. You don't erase the old traditions. You rebrand them. Let's talk about Christmas first because it's the most obvious example and the one that opens the deepest rabbit hole. Jesus Christ was almost certainly not born on December 25th. The Bible gives us virtually no information about the date of his birth. The Gospel of Luke mentions shepherds tending their flocks in fields at night, which wouldn't have happened in December in Judea because it was the cold, rainy season. Sheep would have been brought to shelter. Most biblical scholars believe Jesus was likely born in spring or early fall, possibly during the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles in September. So why December 25th? Because Rome had already established this date as one of the most important holidays in their calendar. Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun. This festival honored Sol Invictus, a sun god whose cult was officially established by Emperor Aurelian in 274 AD, though sun worship itself dated back much further in Roman tradition. December 25th was chosen because it occurred just after the winter solstice, when the days finally begin to lengthen again. The sun, symbolically defeated by darkness, begins its victory march back toward summer. The unconquered sun is reborn. But it gets deeper. December 25th also fell during Saturnalia, Rome's most raucous, beloved festival honoring Saturn, the god of agriculture and time. Saturnalia ran from December 17th to the 23rd, though celebrations often extended well beyond. During Saturnalia, normal social order was inverted. Slaves were temporarily freed and could speak to their masters without punishment. People wore colorful and formal clothes instead of togas. They exchanged gifts, particularly candles and small clay figurines. They decorated their homes with wreaths and greenery. They feasted lavishly. They crowned a mock king who presided over the revelry. Sound familiar? The early church fathers knew exactly what they were doing. In the 4th century, Pope Julius III officially declared December 25th as the date of Christ's nativity. There's no theological reason for this choice. It was strategic religious politics. Rather than telling Romans to abandon their beloved winter festival, church leaders simply transformed its meaning. The birth of the unconquered sun became the birth of the Son of God, the light of the world. The revelry, feasting, gift-giving, and decorations continued with a new label attached. And let me just quickly mention, if you're enjoying this deep dive into history, this is Professor Archive, where we uncover the fascinating truths behind the stories you thought you knew. I'm curious, where are you watching from right now and what time is it there? Drop your location and time in the comments. I love seeing our global community, and if you're finding real value in this content and want to support the channel, consider leaving a super thanks. It genuinely helps us create more content like this. All right, back to our story. The Christmas tree itself has pagan roots that stretch back to pre-Christian Germanic tribes. Evergreen trees were sacred symbols in many pagan cultures because they remained green through winter when everything else died. They represented life, fertility, and the promise of spring's return. Ancient Egyptians brought palm fronds into their homes during the winter solstice. Romans decorated their homes with evergreen boughs during Saturnalia. Celtic Druids considered evergreens sacred. The Germanic tribes, particularly in areas that would become Germany and Scandinavia, had a tradition of bringing entire trees into their homes and decorating them with candles and ornaments. When Christian missionaries arrived in these northern territories, they faced the same problem Constantine had faced. These traditions were deeply beloved and culturally entrenched. The solution? Baptize the tradition. Martin Luther is often credited with adding candles to Christmas trees in the 16th century, giving the pagan practice Christian symbolism. The tree represented the Garden of Eden, and the candles represented Christ as the light of the world. Now let's talk about Easter, which is even more fascinating because the very name exposes its pagan origins. In English, we call it Easter. That word derives from Eostre or Ostara, a Germanic goddess of spring and fertility. The Venerable Bede, an 8th century English monk and historian, explicitly wrote that the month of April was called Eosterminath after the goddess Eostre, and that pagan festivals in her honor occurred during this time. When Christianity spread through Anglo-Saxon England, the spring celebration of Christ's resurrection absorbed the name of the pagan festival it replaced. The timing of Easter is equally revealing. It's not a fixed date like Christmas. Easter is what's called a movable feast, calculated according to an ancient formula. It falls on the first Sunday following the first full moon after the vernal equinox. This lunar solar calculation has nothing to do with any biblical account and everything to do with pagan spring festivals that were tied to agricultural cycles and celestial events. Spring equinox festivals were nearly universal in ancient cultures. They mark the end of winter, the return of warmth, the rebirth of vegetation, and the breeding season for animals. The Jewish Passover itself, during which Jesus was crucified according to the Gospels, was originally a spring agricultural festival that was later connected to the Exodus story. But here's where it gets wild: the symbols associated with Easter. Eggs and rabbits. What do eggs and rabbits have to do with the resurrection of Jesus Christ? Absolutely nothing, theologically speaking, but they have everything to do with pagan fertility festivals. Eggs have been symbols of rebirth, fertility, and new life in cultures worldwide for thousands of years. Ancient Persians, Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans all used eggs in spring celebrations. Decorated eggs have been found in ancient Sumerian and Egyptian tombs. Rabbits and hares, because of their notorious reproductive capacity, have been symbols of fertility since antiquity. The hare was sacred to Eostre. It was sacred to Aphrodite in Greek religion and to various fertility goddesses across Europe. The practice of coloring eggs has pagan origins. Persians painted eggs for Nowruz, their New Year celebration at the spring equinox, thousands of years before Christianity. When Christianity spread, these practices simply continued under a new religious framework. The Church eventually developed Christian symbolism for the egg, declaring it represented the tomb of Christ, with the chick breaking free symbolizing resurrection. But this was theological retrofit, not origin. Let's talk about Halloween, or All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day if we're being technical. October 31st was Samhain, the Celtic festival marking the end of the harvest season and the beginning of winter, the darker half of the year. The Celts believed that on Samhain, the boundary between the world of the living and the dead became thin, and spirits could cross over. To ward off harmful spirits, people would wear costumes and masks to disguise themselves. They would light bonfires. They would leave food offerings for the dead. They would carve faces into turnips and gourds and place candles inside them to frighten away evil spirits. When Christianity spread through Celtic lands, the church couldn't eliminate Samhain. It was too deeply rooted in the culture. So, in the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designated November 1st as All Saints' Day, a day to honor all Christian saints and martyrs. The night before became All Hallows' Eve, eventually shortened to Halloween. The practices continued virtually unchanged, just recontextualized. Wearing costumes to hide from spirits became dressing as saints and angels. Leaving offerings for the dead became souling, where people would go door to door offering prayers for the dead in exchange for soul cakes, an obvious precursor to trick-or-treating. Carving turnips became carving pumpkins in America, where turnips weren't readily available. Let me give you another example that most people don't know about. Valentine's Day. February 14th has been associated with romantic love since the Middle Ages, but its origins are much stranger. The date coincides with Lupercalia, an ancient Roman festival that was celebrated from February 13th to 15th. Lupercalia was a fertility festival honoring Lupercus, a pastoral god, and the she-wolf who nursed Romulus and Remus. The festival involved some truly bizarre rituals. Roman priests called Luperci would sacrifice goats and a dog. They would then cut the goat hides into strips, dip them in sacrificial blood, and run through the streets slapping women with these bloody strips. Women actually welcomed this because they believed it would make them fertile. There was also a matchmaking lottery where young men would draw the names of young women from a jar, and these couples would be paired for the duration of the festival, often leading to marriage. The church wanted to eliminate this rowdy, sexualized pagan festival, so Pope Gelasius I declared February 14th as St. Valentine's Day around 496 AD. The problem is that nobody's entirely sure which St. Valentine this referred to. There were at least 3 different Christian martyrs named Valentine or Valentinus, and their stories became conflated. The association with romantic love was a medieval invention, particularly popularized by Geoffrey Chaucer's poetry in the 14th century, but the date remained the same as Lupercalia, and the theme of love and fertility persisted, just sanitized for Christian sensibilities. Here's a question that needs to be asked. Was this absorption of pagan traditions a cynical manipulation, or was it a practical necessity for the survival and spread of Christianity? The answer is probably both. We have direct evidence that church leaders consciously adopted this strategy. In 601 AD, Pope Gregory the Fifth sent a letter to a missionary named Mellitus, who was working to convert the Anglo-Saxons in Britain. The letter explicitly instructed Mellitus not to destroy pagan temples, but to convert them into churches. Gregory wrote, "If these temples are well built, they must be purified from the worship of demons and dedicated to the service of the true God. In this way, we hope that the people will abandon idolatry and resort to these places as before, and may come to know and adore the true God." Gregory went further, instructing that pagan festivals should also be transformed rather than eliminated. And since they have a custom of sacrificing many oxen to demons, let some other solemnity be substituted in its place, such as a day of dedication or the festivals of the holy martyrs whose relics are enshrined there. This was official church policy. Cultural assimilation, not elimination. But was this manipulation? From one perspective, yes. The church deliberately disguised Christian practices in pagan clothing to make conversion easier, sometimes deceiving converts about the origins of their own traditions. From another perspective, it was genius-level cultural adaptation. If Christianity had insisted on completely erasing all existing cultural practices, it would have faced constant rebellions and likely would never have spread beyond the Mediterranean. By absorbing local traditions and giving them new meanings, Christianity became universal, Catholic in the literal Greek sense of the word, meaning according to the whole. Let's look at the 7-day week itself, because even our calendar is a hybrid of pagan and Christian elements. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday are all named after pagan deities or celestial bodies worshipped as gods. Sunday is Sunday, Monday is Moon Day, Tuesday is Tuesday, named after the Germanic god Tiw or Tyr, god of war. Wednesday is Woden's Day, named after Odin. Thursday is Thor's Day. Friday is Frigg's Day, named after the Norse goddess Frigg. Saturday is Saturn's Day, the only one retaining its Roman name. Christianity kept this pagan week structure but simply designated Sunday as the Lord's Day, the day of Christ's resurrection, conveniently absorbing the existing sun worship day. The church calendar itself is a palimpsest of pagan festivals. Candlemas, celebrated on February 2nd, coincides with Imbolc, the Celtic festival marking the midpoint between winter solstice and spring equinox. St. John's Day, celebrated on June 24th, coincides with the summer solstice and absorbed centuries of midsummer fire festivals celebrated across Europe. The Assumption of Mary on August 15th coincides with ancient harvest festivals. Martinmas on November 11th absorbed autumn slaughter festivals when livestock were butchered before winter. Even the liturgical colors used in Christian worship have pagan origins. Purple, associated with Lent and Advent, was the color of Roman royalty and the color worn by candidates for initiation in mystery religions. White, used for Easter and Christmas, was associated with purity in many pagan traditions. Green, used for ordinary time, represented growth in vegetation in agricultural festivals. Red, used for martyrs' days and Pentecost, represented blood and fire in countless pagan rituals. The practice of church bells has pagan precedents. Bells were used in Celtic and Germanic paganism to ward off evil spirits. The sign of the cross itself, while obviously Christian, has a curious resemblance to pre-Christian practices. Ancient Egyptians made similar gestures. Ezekiel 9:4 describes marking the foreheads of the faithful, a practice that predates Christianity and may have influenced early Christian adoption of the sign. Holy water is another example. While the Bible mentions ceremonial washing, the specific practice of keeping water in fonts at church entrances for people to bless themselves has parallels in Roman religion, where water basins were placed at temple entrances for ritual purification. The Celtic tradition of holy wells, natural springs believed to have healing or spiritual properties, was absorbed wholesale into Christianity, with these wells simply being rededicated to Christian saints. The entire concept of patron saints has pagan precedent. In polytheistic religions, different gods protected different cities, professions, and aspects of life. Athena was the patron of Athens, Vulcan was the patron of blacksmiths, Neptune protected sailors. When Christianity became dominant, this system didn't disappear. It transformed. Saint Christopher became the patron saint of travelers. Saint Joseph became the patron of workers. Saint Lucy became the patron saint of the blind. The functional role remained identical, only the names changed. Pilgrimage sites reveal the same pattern. Many of the most important Christian pilgrimage destinations were sacred sites, long before Christianity arrived. The sanctuary of Guadalupe in Mexico was built on a hill, sacred to the Aztec mother goddess Tonantzin. The Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris was built on an island in the Seine that was sacred to Celtic river goddesses. Wells, springs, mountains, and groves that were sacred in pagan traditions often became Christian holy sites, sometimes with suspiciously convenient visions of Mary or saints appearing at these pre-existing sacred locations. Now here's the genuinely fascinating theological question this raises. Does any of this matter? If Christianity deliberately absorbed pagan traditions, does that undermine its claims to truth? Or does it simply demonstrate that Christianity, like all successful religions, was culturally adaptive and practically minded? The answer depends entirely on your perspective. For fundamentalists who believe Christianity must be completely separate from worldly traditions, these pagan origins are deeply troubling. Some Christian denominations, particularly certain Protestant groups, refuse to celebrate Christmas or Easter precisely because of their pagan origins. They argue that worshiping God through pagan festivals, even renamed ones, is unacceptable. But for most Christians throughout history, these pagan origins have been irrelevant to faith. The meaning given to a tradition matters more than its origin. A Christmas tree doesn't worship Odin just because Germanic pagans once considered evergreens sacred. An Easter egg doesn't worship Easter just because eggs were used in fertility rituals. The symbols have been invested with new meaning. The dates have been given new significance. From this perspective, Christianity's absorption of pagan traditions isn't corruption, it's incarnation. It's the religion becoming enfleshed in actual human cultures rather than remaining an abstract set of propositions. There's also a deeper historical truth here. All religions borrow from earlier traditions. Judaism absorbed elements from Canaanite, Egyptian, and Babylonian religion. The Genesis creation account has parallels to the Enuma Elish, a Babylonian creation myth. The flood story has striking similarities to the Epic of Gilgamesh. The kosher laws have parallels to earlier purity codes in the ancient Near East. This doesn't invalidate Judaism, it situates it in its historical and cultural context. The same is true for Christianity. What's remarkable is how successful this strategy was. Christianity didn't conquer the Roman Empire through military force. It conquered through cultural assimilation. By the time Constantine made it the official religion, Christianity had already infiltrated every level of society by making itself familiar, by speaking the cultural language people already understood. December 25th wasn't threatening because it was already a holiday. Easter wasn't foreign because spring festivals already existed. The church simply gave people new stories to tell about the traditions they already loved. But here's the twist. This strategy cut both ways. While Christianity absorbed pagan traditions, those traditions also influenced Christianity. The veneration of Mary in Catholicism, with titles like Queen of Heaven, has clear parallels to goddess worship, particularly Isis worship in Egypt and Artemis worship in Ephesus. The elaborate rituals, incense, vestments, and hierarchies of Catholic and Orthodox Christianity resemble the mystery religions of the ancient world far more than they resemble the simple communal meals of early Christians described in the book of Acts. The cult of saints, the belief in relics, the practice of using images in worship, all of these have precedence in pagan religion. Some historians argue that what we call Christianity is actually a hybrid religion, a synthesis of Jewish apocalypticism, Greek philosophy, Roman organizational structure, and various pagan traditions all melted together into something new. The Christianity practiced in a medieval European cathedral would have been almost unrecognizable to a first-century Christian in Jerusalem. Whether this represents corruption or evolution depends on your theological commitments. What we can say with historical certainty is this. Virtually every major Christian holiday corresponds to a pre-existing pagan festival. The dates, the symbols, the practices, even many of the stories have pagan antecedents. This isn't conspiracy theory. It's documented history, acknowledged even by church historians. The question isn't whether Christianity absorbed pagan traditions. The question is what we make of that fact. Perhaps the most honest answer is that religions are living, breathing cultural organisms. They don't exist in a vacuum. They interact with the cultures they inhabit, and they change in that interaction. The Christianity practiced in Ethiopia looks different from the Christianity practiced in Mexico, which looks different from the Christianity practiced in Korea, because each has absorbed different local cultural elements. This has been true from the very beginning. The Christianity that emerged in Rome looked different from the Christianity that emerged in Syria or Egypt, even in the first few centuries. The pagan traditions embedded in Christian holidays are evidence of this cultural exchange. They're fossils, remnants of the ancient world preserved in amber. When you hang mistletoe at Christmas, you're participating in a druidic practice. When you light Advent candles, you're echoing Roman solstice rituals. When you give Easter eggs, you're performing a Persian spring custom. These traditions have been so thoroughly absorbed that most Christians don't even think about their origins. They're just what you do, they're tradition. And maybe that's the final truth. Tradition is always a blend of the sacred and the secular, the religious and the cultural, the ancient and the modern. The Christianity that conquered the Roman Empire didn't do so by destroying everything that came before. It did so by transforming it, by taking what people already loved and giving it new meaning. The winter festival became the celebration of Christ's birth. The spring fertility festival became the celebration of resurrection. The harvest festivals became Thanksgiving. The memorial customs became All Saints' Day. You can judge this as compromise or wisdom, corruption or incarnation, betrayal or brilliance. But you can't deny that it worked. Christianity became the dominant religion of Europe and eventually much of the world precisely because it was flexible enough to absorb local traditions while maintaining its core claims about Jesus Christ. The pagan traditions didn't destroy Christianity. They became part of its cultural expression, the clothing in which eternal truths were dressed for a particular time and place. So when you celebrate Christmas on December 25th, you're participating in a tradition that stretches back through Christian Rome to pagan Rome, through Sol Invictus to Saturn, through Roman sun worship to countless ancient cultures that celebrated the winter solstice. When you celebrate Easter with eggs and rabbits, you're connected to spring festivals that predate Christianity by thousands of years. These holidays are palimpsests, layers of meaning written over earlier meanings, erasures that never quite erased what came before. And here's the beautiful irony: those ancient pagans who poured wine for Saturn, who lit fires for the sun god, who left eggs for Eostre, they wanted the same things we want. They wanted hope in the darkness of winter. They wanted to celebrate life returning in spring. They wanted meaning, connection, and ritual to mark the turning of the seasons. The symbols changed, the stories changed, but the deep human needs remained constant. Maybe that's why these traditions persist. Not because of some conspiracy to preserve paganism, but because they tap into something fundamental about being human, about our relationship with nature, time, and the sacred. The question isn't really whether Christian holidays follow pagan traditions. They obviously do. The question is whether that makes them less meaningful or more, whether the layered history enriches them or corrupts them, whether continuity with the ancient world is a feature or a bug. And that's a question each person has to answer for themselves. Professor Archive, signing off. Thanks for watching this journey through the hidden history of our holidays. Until next time, keep questioning what you think you know.